I met Dr. Sider in the classroom in 2009. I was a senior at Messiah at that time.
So I knew of him before I ever came to Messiah.
When I first met him, I think being brethren in Christ, I'm pretty sure I knew of him before I came to Messiah, would see him at our general conferences and things like that. He dressed fairly conservatively. So I think my first impression was kind of that maybe he was kind of not super relational or couldn't really relate to younger people. But as I got to know him through class, really realized that wasn't true. His, dress style and some of that was different than mine would have been as a 18 or 20-year-old. But he really had an ability to connect well with students, even though they were a lot younger than him.
Well, when I was finishing up my PhD program years later, the academic dean of the college, Carlton Whitlinger, and the president, Arthur Clemenhage, contacted me, solicited me as a history teacher at the college. And I accepted that and arrived here in 1963. The first person I met on campus was Earl Miller, this very famous man. And he saw me, came across campus and welcomed me to Messiah College. That was a great moment.
He was just a very kind man, and that came across in the class. He was very respectful of the students. He obviously knew a lot more than we did about history, and yet was able to, make you feel like, didn't make you feel like you were ignorant of the subject. He was also, and this wouldn't be maybe expected, but he was also able to be very vulnerable, just sharing his own life.
He invited me to consider writing his and his wife's biography, I think in 2016 or 2017, which was a real honor for me. Right? He had asked me to do take on other research projects before that, but this was significant, right? One of the things that's simply true about Morris is that he's written lots of people's biographies over time. The bulk, in some ways, of his scholarship has been telling the stories of Brethren in Christ people and institutions. So I think it was especially meaningful to be invited to tell his story. As someone who has written lots of stories of people, that he saw in me the ability to do that was really meaningful.
Well, I, along with maybe a couple generations of Messiah students, I think remember him as a wonderful teacher, and advisor, and friend in many ways. And I do all of that. I think that a lot of his legacy has to do with the work he has done in the Brethren in Christ Church in terms of historical research and telling the stories of the church's 200 and almost 50 years history. I mean, he's written biographies and histories of individual congregations and histories of organizations, like an older history of Messiah College. And there isn't anyone at this point who is taking his place with all of that. And so you have to wonder what is going to happen to that particular legacy when he's no longer here.
I would say that writing Morris's biography has reinforced some of the ways that I saw him when I was a student in his classroom, or when I was, a colleague working alongside him in the Historical Society and with the Historical Journal. It has, reminded me of the importance of the work that he's done for the church in helping us to preserve our history, in helping to popularize our history, and invite other people to care about these important stories from our past. Morris also published a book, his first book of biographies. It was called 9 Portraits, and it told 9 different stories of Brethren in Christ church leaders from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. His work, again, is both a product of his life, but it's also a primary source about what's going on in the church at this time, right? How do we see his work as something that is being shaped by the time period in which he's writing it? One of the things that I'm really wanting to stress in my writing of this biography is that it's a joint biography, right? That it's the story of Morris's life, but it's also the story Leon, his wife of over 70 years. You know, one of the things that I really want to stress in the biography is that Morris and Leon had a marriage that would have been considered quite egalitarian for the time. They were married in the early 1950s. When we think historically about the relationship between the sexes at that period of time, right? Especially in the church, there was often certain ideas about male headship, right, or men kind of being the breadwinners, right, and women being in kind of a subordinate role. But Morris and Leon, from what I can tell from the records that I have at my disposal, had in some ways a different relationship there, right? A much more egalitarian relationship where, say, the division of labor in the household wasn't necessarily divided along gendered lines, right? Morris did a lot of the cooking, right, and the preparation of food in the household. Having said that, I think there are also ways in which we can see in the story of their lives some of the gender dynamics of the church at that time. But her work, again, behind the scenes, made it possible for Morris to do the kind of work that he did. And I think without a partner like Leon, Morris wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things that he accomplished in his life. And so that's one of the things that I really want to stress in the biography, is that the partnership between these two individuals in marriage and in other ways really made possible Morris's work as a historian, as a storyteller.
I was the one who introduced the historiographical course to the college. We called it Historical Study and Writing. It was a mixture of how to do historical writing, how to do research. Back then we didn't have the computer, so it was all a matter of learning how to do cards, for example. How to do interviews. We talked about some of the great historians in history, talked about theories of history, and then each student had to do a paper entirely from primary sources. And I think students liked that class from what they said and what they said afterwards. I don't know how many students later told me that I taught them how to write. I was very hard on them on writing. I think over the course of maybe 25 years that I taught the course, on this research paper, I may have given a total of 6 A's. But my intent was to show that what they were doing could be improved if they wanted to do first-class writing.
Dr. Sider's legacy is that he cared so much about people. He cared enough to write their stories and to find their stories. All of his biographies of Brethren of Christ leaders that have never been written before him, he cared about those people who nobody else had cared enough to write their story. And so I guess this is the point of the film where I thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sider, for teaching me about the history of the college that I have chosen, the area in which I live, the denomination that birthed this university. Thank you for sharing your story with me, and I know that there are so many more out there who are excited to hear your story and will just be elated to see you on camera, and that you have so much left to tell. Thank you, Dr. Sider. and cut.